I Have a Dream is one of, if not the most impactful American speech of history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s courage and passion invigorated the masses, and his legacy is often connected to this particular speech, for good reason. It is difficult to compare other speeches in America to such a high standard as this. Many people have tried to reach the level of charisma as King, but failed to captivate people's attention to the same degree. King put his literal life into bettering America by dragging society toward a more equal treatment of African Americans. The speech that I thought of as another extremely impactful example is Reagan's speech on the 40th anniversary of D-Day. The speech occurred in June of 1984, in a time when America was dealing with the frustratingly long Cold War. Reagan's speech was a tribute to America's greatest generation and the heroism in the world wars, but also a call to all the allies to band together and end the Cold War. So while he was paying tribute, he was also making a point that it was time for us to work together and end this. He rallied the West to renew our commitment to each other, to our freedom, and to the alliance that protects it. Speaking for and to America and all the West, he said, "We were with you then, and we are with you now." And the then meaning in the World War, and the now meaning in the Cold War. So by connecting these two wars, he was making a point about what we did back then should be done now, and we should end this against the Soviet Union. It's time. This speech reinvigorated the band of nations who rose to defeat the totalitarianism in the Soviet Union by freeing Europe once again, just as the brave Americans had done in World War II. Reagan reinforced the importance of democracy and honor with his passionate rhetoric. He insisted that you all know that some things are worth dying for. One's country is worth dying for, and democracy is worth dying for, because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. And that is about as American as Americans get. And Americans responded favorably to this idea, and a greater sense of community was formed within the country to protect democracy and everything that entails. This speech was an important moment in American history because, with the help of our allies, America was able to resist the Soviet Union in the coming decade, putting an end to the long, drawn-out Cold War. It was impactful for our president to speak so clearly about the common goal we all should fight for in America and in the world, even if that meant that some would lose their lives in that honorable fight. American society became more cohesive in a time when people in America were opposing each other on other matters. Reagan preached that regardless of our domestic disagreements, we should band together to end the Cold War in protection of what America was founded upon centuries ago, democracy. For the second question, I think Martin Luther King Jr. was very right that African Americans had been mistreated on countless issues since America's inception. It was wrong then, and it is still wrong now. The societal changes have often been positive and progressive in the decades after King's speech, but the work is not finished. The issues existing to this day prove that African Americans are not yet truly being treated as equals to whites, regardless of what some white people may have you think. There are many systematic inequalities that occur in our society that point to a racist agenda in our society. While these injustices are not as obvious as they were in the 60s at the time of King's speech, they are still devastating to many African Americans. And another consistent discriminatory trend that has existed for a very long time is the income inequality that exists between the two races. I know we talk about this a lot with women, and we still do, but it's just as relevant with African Americans. Whites have consistently made more money than African Americans, regardless of what work they were doing in comparison. There are many statistics to prove this inequality, but a pretty damning one is the difference between the top 20% of white earners and the top 20% of black earners. This gap is actually growing every year, which means that we are actually regressing in our progression as a more equal society. In addition, black families' average wealth in America is 10% approximately of what the average white family earns. And that's almost crazy to think about, that the average black family is making 10% of what the average white family is making. And that's just a small part of all the statistics that point to this trend in America for white people to make more money than anyone else. I could state so many statistics that allude to the fact that our society does not treat black people fairly. It's maddening because many of these gaps are actually growing. The powerful white men in charge of America are consistently keeping the system white dominant, and it seems discriminatory at best, and is most likely a form of systematic racism. The trend is not improving in any way, and it will not without brave speeches like King's I Have a Dream speech. It takes courageous people like Martin Luther King Jr. to speak out against these unfair societal norms. Even white people should be imploring change, because that is for the betterment of all society if we are all treated as equals. King taught us what we all should have known then and should know now, that all men are created equal regardless of the color of their skin.